Today's episode was recorded remotely from Gothenburg, Sweden, Boston, Massachusetts, and Cooperstown, New York. Please be sure to check out our other episodes, including Jose's first appearance on the show with Director of the Center for Infectious Diseases, Mike Osterholm. Don't forget to click subscribe, and please rate the show on your podcast platform of choice.
But rage is just lashing out. It's just an emotion, and it can be destructive. When you're enraged, you want to hurt someone. You want revenge. You want, fury lashes out could be violent. Whereas for the problems that we face being human, it's really ingenuity and sympathy that work against dying of the light. We cure diseases. We figure out ways of reducing poverty, of extending human rights.
Welcome to Sing for Science, the show where musicians and scientists talk about music and science. I'm your host, Matt White. Each week we'll talk about a song by our guest artist and how it connects with our guest scientist's area of expertise. Today we're delighted to welcome back acclaimed Swedish-Argentinian singer-songwriter, biochemistry PhD candidate, and all-around elegant human, José González.
Hi.
José's music is best known for its quiet intensity and for songs that grapple with some of humanity's bigger questions. And his new album, Against the Dying of the Light, is certainly no exception. The album's title track reflects on our species' fragile moment in history while offering an optimistic humanist vision, a perspective inspired in large part by the work of today's guest scientist, Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker is a cognitive scientist, psychologist, and author who teaches at Harvard University and is widely known for his books exploring language, human nature, and the long arc of human progress. In his best-selling book, Enlightenment Now, he argues that the values of reason, science, humanism, and progress have helped drive remarkable improvements in human well-being over time, and that by most metrics, there has never been a better moment to be human. The title of today's episode on the podcast is Rage Against the Dying of the Light, Enlightenment and the Case for Human Progress. Hello, José and Steven. Welcome to Sing for Science.
Hi,
Hello.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
José, it's such a joy to have you back. Your first appearance on the show was to chat about COVID microbiology during the pandemic with the director of the Center for Infectious Disease. The second was to talk humanism with UK science star Brian Cox. And now you've gotten me on a Zoom call with the grand poobah himself of humanist thinkers, Steven Pinker. So to say you're a Renaissance man would be a gross understatement from my perspective.
I'm just excited about these ideas.
Yeah. First up, I have an entirely new perspective on this Dylan Thomas poem from which you've grabbed the title. Because I think in my mind's eye, whenever I've heard this poem, I just kind of imagined him reciting it sort of battered and at death's door from a West Village tavern. You have an altogether different take on it, I gather.
Yeah, I mean, when I was writing the lyrics for this song, it just came out, those words and that sentence. Mm-hmm. And I recognized it a bit. And I have a pretty crappy memory.
Yeah.
I recognized it, and I thought, of course, someone else has used this sentence somewhere else. But I just decided to keep it and basically used it to say that we can basically rebel against some of the forces that nature is like pushing on us.
Yes, but you elected to exclude rage against.
Yeah, so I was in a way like saying that I didn't know the exact sentence by Dylan Thomas.
Yeah. Steven, do you have a favorite Dylan Thomas poem?
Geez, that would have to be it. Not that I'm an expert on the poetry of Dylan Thomas, but what else can you choose?
Do you have a favorite poem by another poet?
Wow. I probably do, but I've never been put on the spot to name it. So it might take me a while to rummage through my memory.
It wouldn't have occurred to me to put you on the spot like that, but I heard you on Conversations with Tyler, and he asked you, seemingly on the spot as a curveball, if you had a favorite Bob Dylan album.
Oh, right. Yes.
And without missing a beat, you said Highway 61, which is a perspective I share. Jose, do you have a favorite Bob Dylan album?
I was I had this similar problem today when I was talking about music, and I just immediately think about Nina Simone singing "I Shall Be Released," which I think is a Bob Dylan song. So yeah, I mentioned that one.
Well, Steven, I'm going to come back to you on the favorite poem before the hour's up. On to the big show. So first of all, I just want to say, dear listeners, I implore you to watch the music video for this song. I find it to be tremendously life-affirming. I think it lines up so well with the message of the song, and it creates this rare effect of it seeming like a one shot, like it was done in one shot, which I'm sure it wasn't. But I am curious about the sort of centerpiece sequence where you're in the grand staircase, and it just seems like it would have required no shortage of coordination among moving parts, bubbles, balloons, background actors. How many times did you have to do that?
Well, it was my ambitious friend, director, Fredrik Egerstrand. We basically went to this theater in Gothenburg and asked them if we could use their staircase and their rooms, and we sent out some mails to friends, and we got together like 80 people, and we had a friend that was working there, so my girlfriend and they went down, or actually not down, they went to the place where they have all the costumes and just had a field day. And so our kids are there, and it became this, like, we didn't really know how to portray a lyric like this in a video, so basically we just wanted to have a video with lots of humans and just walking around in this like ambience, and have a bit like a theater part, and then a part of people hanging out after the theater, and me just walking past and singing this lyric. Not that deep, but just like showing faces, because the previous video that we did was basically like an experiment to do a video with the AI, where we actually just asked for a plot, and we got more than 90% negative comments on that one. So this was a bit of a reaction to that experiment.
Well, that lines up especially with the lyric about replicators here. I won't push you to answer the question about how many times it took you to do the balloon shot, because let's just allow viewers to suspend disbelief and enjoy that.
Yeah, about 10 times, and the last times there was one of the girls dressed up in a costume. She was up there throwing balloons because we didn't have enough people for that shot. So she was pretty upset.
Well, thanks for letting us in. So enough with those inane questions. If you're both up for it, I'd love to pursue a Sing for Science first and have you both chat about this song line by line and maybe localize the points of resonance with your book Enlightenment Now, Steven. So
do you want me to start, or do you want
Steven go
to?
for it.
Because I feel like with lyrics they can be so short, so it's difficult to put enough words to tell a story, and your book Enlightenment Now tells the story and the ideas behind Enlightenment values and why they're important in our times. So accept who you have become, where you're from, all things set, all things gone. I was thinking of humans and evolutionary psychology, and that I like to mention often to people when I'm doing interviews that we are apes, we're cultural apes. So it's about sort of accepting our baggage, that we are who we are, basically, to some extent, and we can sort of change that with some ideas. And that's the part where I look forward to talk to you, Steven.
Yeah, in my work, there's a tension between an acknowledgement of human nature, the fact that we are apes, that my book, The Blank Slate, the modern denial of human nature, defended the concept of human nature against the accusation that it is fatalist, reactionary, cynical, that it chokes off all hope for progress. I think one of the reasons that so many intellectuals adopted the idea of the blank slate is that it seemed more hopeful that, as they say, you can't change human nature. And if we're stuck with a lot of not so noble traits from our primate ancestors of urge for dominance, cognitive biases and limitations, lust, a lack of ability to control our impulses now and look into the future. The idea was, if we're stuck with that, then there's no hope. All of the problems we see today, we're going to see tomorrow and the day after tomorrow forever. So don't try to change the world, except that it's not going to get any better. Now, I thought that, aside from the fact that that's rather depressing, but whether it's depressing has nothing to do with whether it's true or false. But I thought it was false simply because of what human nature actually is. That is, it's not a set of fixed reflexes. We are apes, but we're very, very, very weird apes. I mean, we have language. There's a reason we have language. There are two reasons we have language. One of them is that we have ideas. We think up solutions to problems. We have know-how. We share the results of our trial and error learning. We try not to repeat our mistakes. We teach our kids our innovations with the help of language. Also, we're highly social, unusually social for any mammals, especially among people that we're not related to. It's not so hard to explain why people are why any organism is nice to its relatives. They share genes, so any gene that makes you likely to help a relative is helping a copy of that gene inside that relative. But humans are unusual that we cooperate with strangers. And so right off the bat, we're deeply weird primates, even if we are primates. And what that does is at least it opens the door to the possibility of progress. Namely, if we recognize that our problems are problems that we can try to solve, just as we solved problems in our survival, like trapping animals and squeezing natural medicines out of plants to treat our diseases, and the myriad problems that our ancestors solved, we can say, well, violent crime is a problem. War is a problem. Slavery is a problem. Oppression is a problem. Let's use our ingenuity to try to solve that. And that's what means that even with a fixed human nature, as long as your understanding of human nature includes this open-ended, combinatorial, creative process of problem solving, that opens the door to the possibility of progress, even if you believe, as I do, in human nature. What it means, though, is that you do have to acknowledge that human nature exists. Our cognitive processes are amazing, but they are flawed. We have a lot of blind spots. We have to be aware of them. We also have a capacity for universal human concern, universal empathy, universal human rights. But that, too, doesn't come naturally. I think naturally we tend to favor our friends, our blood relationships, our members of our clan. And it takes some work to expand it to embrace all of humanity, let alone other species. So any attempt at a utopia that hopes to just negate and rewrite human nature, like some of the genocidal dictatorships of the 20th century, Mao and Stalin, can do tremendous harm. We can't deny human nature, but we can work with human nature to try to make things better. So that's how I reconcile these two tensions. Human nature exists, human progress exists. They're not contradictory, but nor does one guarantee the other.
No. And also I was thinking of all things said, all things gone. I was thinking of how we get born in certain places and in certain cultures, and we do have some sort of imprinting from where we're from. Language is one example, but I am a fan of trying to fight dogma, or at least try to change your opinions depending on what you hear and arguments and data. So that's also like part of that those sentences.
Can I throw out a comment on one of Matt's observations at the beginning of the conversation? Jose's song "Dying of the Light" omits the word rage, which is, I think, interesting for two reasons. In the Dylan Thomas poem is powerful precisely because the verb rage, an emotionally evocative word, ordinarily is directed against people. Someone pisses you off, annoys you, you're enraged at that person. I think a lot of great poems begin with some slight anomaly, something that just doesn't quite fit, and then you think twice and you realize how it does fit. And so rage against the dying of the light at first doesn't make sense because the literal image of a light and the metaphorical image of dying, there's no human at the other end to be intimidated or bullied by your rage. And so Thomas's poem is emotionally evocative precisely because it makes us think the same fury, rage, effort that I direct against people who've offended me, I should direct against just the process of dying, and I should do everything I can to stay alive with that same emotional energy that I might direct at a human enemy. So that's what makes the poem so beautiful. Now, but crucially, that's exactly the verb that Jose omitted, and I think for a reason, namely that given that we do have all of these forces of nature that are kind of keeping us down, pushing us back, that progress consists of working against them. But rage is just lashing out. It's just an emotion, and it can be destructive. When you're enraged, you want to hurt someone. You want revenge. You want fury lashes out, can be violent. Whereas for the problems that we face being human, it's really ingenuity and sympathy that work against dying of the light. We cure diseases, we figure out ways of reducing poverty, of extending human rights, and all of these are not exactly rage. And so I'm guessing, I don't know what.
No, it's interesting because I when I've been trying to write these type of songs, I've done a couple. I'm trying to find a common enemy. I think that's like something that many people. Sort of talking about our nature, like it's easy to gather around a common idea, gather around a common enemy, and so instead of going for tribal enemies, I was thinking of how can we find a common struggle for humanity, and then that's when. So I think if I had more space musically, I might have added rage, but so we could rage against these. But it's as you're saying, like that wouldn't be the productive way to go.
Yes, only Bob Dylan can get away with 37 verses, or 43 verses. But it is an interesting contrast in mindsets of how what leads to progress. And there's an article by the blogger Scott Alexander in his blog. It used to be called Astral Codex 10. It used to be called Slate Star Codex, and a anagram of his name, and then he switched it to a new anagram. Anyway, the post was called Conflict versus Mistake. And the contrast is, if you want to improve things, do you identify some bad people and try to defeat them? Or do you treat the problem as like a disease that needs to be diagnosed and cured? Those are two very different mindsets. And there is, I think, a great temptation, especially when people are young, to identify the bad guy and to try to defeat him. I mean, and that's kind of built into the theory of progress behind, say, Marxism, where it's class conflict, or modern, I think, critical social justice ideology, where there are oppressors and oppressed. That's one way of dealing with problems. For climate change, it's all the evil of the big oil companies. But another way is to say, to be alive means to be faced with problems. There are germs that are out to get you. There's entropy, things fall apart. There's God doesn't rain manna down on us or energy.
Rage against the entropy.
Yeah, rage against entropy. Yes.
Yeah. Good luck.
Use our ingenuity to figure out where the problems are coming from and diagnose and solve them. So it's a different mindset, and of course, which is what makes rage a double-edged verb. It is appropriate to a human enemy. And one can use it metaphorically, as Thomas did, to refer to just the will to live, not to surrender.
And it has to me, I associate with Don Quixote, like you're fighting something that's it's a lost cause, like you're
windmill, yes.
Yeah, you're not able to fight death.
I don't want to derail us too much, but Stephen, I have two questions based on what you just said, and this is perhaps a big excursion from where we are. But when you talk about that blog title, it brings to mind this thing I think of every now and then. How could outcomes have been different in American history had Abraham Lincoln elected to further punish a losing South after the Civil War? Would Reconstruction have gone better? But it seemed to me that the intention was for him to have taken the high road and perhaps rehabilitate the thinking of the South and not punish them further.
It's a great counterfactual question. And Lincoln, of course, did coin the term the better angels of our nature, which I stole from my book title.
Yes.
And he clearly did have he was inspired by the hope that the better angels of our nature would prevail. Try to imagine the counterfactual. That is, if it was more punitive, or for that matter, during Reconstruction, there were what the Southerners called the carpetbaggers, the people coming from the North that seemed more intrusive than the South maybe was ready for? And was there a way to not seem to be insulting, punishing, condescending to the South, but nonetheless would have preserved the rights of African Americans? Mm-hmm. Very hard to say. If it was more punitive, we do know we have another dramatic case of a victory followed by punitive measures, and that was, of course, the First World War, which
that didn't go well.
The reparations didn't go so well. It would take some good Civil War and Reconstruction historians to flesh this out. But could that have led to a second Civil War if it had been more punitive?
Right, it could have been worse.
It's just so hard to answer. I mean, it's a profound question. I'm glad you raised it.
Okay, perhaps not unrelated. My second question is: earlier you mentioned utopia. Or you used that term, and I noticed how in your book, Enlightenment Now, you paid some lip service to Rutger Bregman among a great list of other authors who kind of have a similar bent in his book, Utopia for Realists. I know that the two of you in your books are aligned on this idea that things are actually going far better for us as a species than we might be otherwise led to believe. But do you believe that that is actually a useful aim?
Yeah, but it's a rhetorical flourish, and the for realists is obviously crucial in kind of bringing it back to earth. I don't think I would use that language just because, and here's a case where Rutger and I probably differ. I think I do have a dimmer view of human nature than he does. And so I think that given people are going to differ, they're going to bicker, they're going to be in conflict, that utopia is probably aiming too high. And it's almost, again, he's using it rhetorically. I don't think he literally means we can attain utopia, give him credit. And I'm sometimes faced with an opposite criticism that once we've solved all our problems, won't we be bored and overcome with ennui and anomie, and we'll just be sitting around with infinite leisure and infinite affluence and abundance, and life won't be meaningful? In both cases, I think we'll worry about that when that happens.
Yes.
It won't.
Yeah, there are other words that I've heard people use. Viatopia, William
yes.
McCaskill uses. Yeah, there's two different, and I don't know the difference, but yeah, like basically you aim for something, but you shouldn't like put all your eggs in a basket to reach that air castle. You could you need to like be well along the way. So Viatopia or Protopia.
Yeah. If we could reduce extreme poverty by half, if we could reduce the toll of wars by half, let's try for that, and then we can reduce it by another half after that. And then, will it asymptote? That is, will it asymptote where we never actually get to zero war, zero violent crime, zero oppression? Maybe not, but less is better.
Yeah.
I'm a little shaky on my math. Asymptote, does that always approach the axis but never quite hit it, or is that something else?
Yeah, okay. No, what you said is exactly right.
So that would kind of fit the Viatopia or Protopia. Yeah. Does this past moment of discussion, does that cover the following stanza from where we are? Embrace who we could be, the future you, the future me.
Yeah, exactly. pragmatic visionary is one, like a way to think about it, like embracing who we are, but then like have visions for the future that are grounded in what Steven has been talking about. We're cultural primates.
Yeah, it's like it's aiming higher. That is, who we could be. Unless you think it's feasible to try to improve things, you won't bother. Like, why throw, bad money after good? Why pursue a losing crusade? And I'm often called an optimist, although I tend to move away from that label, because what I see my message is not so much we should look on the bright side, we should see the glass as half full rather than half empty, but rather just be aware of facts such as that life expectancy has more than doubled, extreme poverty has been reduced from 90% of humanity to 10% of humanity, deaths in wars are down. The fact that things have gotten better, though not perfect, does lead to some optimism. Namely, if our ancestors did it and it kind of worked, sort of, better than not, then it's not romantic, it's not foolish, it's not utopian to try to make things better still. It did work. There's no reason it can't work. Therefore, it's kind of an antidote to the kind of fatalism or cynicism that says, don't be ridiculous. You'll never reduce war or poverty or suicide or oppression and so on.
Yeah, I usually mention Hans Rosling. He used to say that I'm a possibilist.
Possibilist, yes, that's good. Yeah. That's your Swedish compatriot.
Is it fair to say that both of you see us in retreat from Enlightenment thinking? Otherwise, you wouldn't have felt the need to write this song and the book, respectively, to extol its virtues?
For me, it was, I'm 47 now, and I remember like hearing about some colleagues were working on research on stem cells, and all of a sudden they were forbidden you weren't allowed to do research on stem cells because of when the ensoulment takes place.
In Sweden, and that was
too?
A long... Or just here?
No, we were more enlightened.
Yeah.
But so it's more than 2 decades of like this hearing stories and feeling like maybe these are stuff that we should outgrow. But yeah, I've seen tendencies towards the opposite, and that's why I felt the urge to write this type of song.
I think there has been a retreat from Enlightenment ideals in the last decade, from authoritarian populism on the right, to some extent from critical social justice wokeism, as it's called, on the left. That is, certainly on the right, many of the institutions that were implemented during the Enlightenment, like liberal democracy with checks and balances, global free trade, to incentivize countries to cooperate, global institutions like European Union and NATO and the United Nations, the ideal of universal human flourishing as opposed to national glory and greatness, the idea of the individual rights of the individual as opposed to the glory of the nation. All of these are being pushed back in my country, by Donald Trump, and obviously by Vladimir Putin, and certainly by authoritarian populist movements everywhere. And also the idea on about some factions on the left that the individual rights should be subsumed to group identity. What doesn't matter is how you treat the individual, but rather that the percentages of different races or sexes being represented is proportional to the population. There is tension to the Enlightenment idea that it begins with the rights of the individual, and with meritocracy, another Enlightenment ideal, that the most suitable people should get positions of influence rather than through patronage or skin color or sex or any qualification other than the ability to actually do the job. So yes, there are counter Enlightenment pressures, and I think there always have been. In the 19th century, very soon after the Enlightenment emerged, there was a romantic counter-Enlightenment. And I think a lot of Enlightenment ideas are not particularly intuitive. There's a sense in which they go against human nature. We're naturally tribal, we're naturally authoritarian, we defer to authorities, we naturally fall back on magical thinking. And the ideas of science, of rules, of a formal organization to society based on principles and laws that everyone can agree on in a social contract, that's not particularly natural. And I think it's inevitable that there'll always be backsliding, always be a kind of human nature pushing back to more primitive ways of social organization. So the case for enlightenment always has to be made because it's not particularly natural. And also it was true for the vast amount of human history that there was pretty much no progress, no increase in life expectancy and living standards. This is really a gift of the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution. But our species is not used to thinking about ways to make things better and better.
Speaking of where the counterintuitive is concerned, I was hoping, Steven, could you list maybe what, in your estimation, are the top maybe 5 most eyebrow-raising facts in your book, things that
progress?
That might be most surprising. I mean, to me, I'll lead with this one, and perhaps you could expand on it. Was the example of neighboring countries and places we think of as conflict-ridden, like Africa, that actually live far more peacefully than we might think.
Yeah, so certainly deaths in war have gone precipitously down since the after World War II, and not even counting World War II, that would just that would just dominate any graph. But even starting in 1946, there's been a kind of up and down curve of deaths in war. There's a bit of an uptick recently because of Ukraine, of Sudan, of Gaza, of Ethiopia, starting to come down somewhat. But still, we're actually even with that uptick, we're better off than we were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So that came as a surprise to me. That was seeing that graph was one of the things that inspired me to write The Better Angels of Our Nature. Another one is homicides. We have pretty good homicide data going back centuries, just because a death is hard to miss and it's easy to count. And governments have long had an interest in counting them. So if you go back again, in every country for which we have data, the death toll from homicides has plunged. So those are 2 pleasant surprises. Others are going even farther back. We tend to forget that there are certain customs that were implemented for centuries, maybe millennia, that are largely gone, like human sacrifice. That is if you want an epidemic to go away, if you want victory in the battlefield, if you want to end a famine, you find some innocent people and you publicly torture them to death to satisfy the need of an angry God for human blood. And that was ubiquitous in ancient civilizations, pretty much gone. Chattel slavery, where the law allows people to own other people, it's pretty much gone. Torture and slow torture and death as a routine form of criminal punishment, breaking on the wheel, burning at the stake.
I remember reading your book, and this is pretty helpful stuff that people were doing routinely.
Pretty gruesome, yeah. So those are just 3 historical examples. Even the example of, we're apt to take it for granted today, although I kind of lived through the revolution of equality for women. Women only got the vote in the United States in the 1920s, other countries more recently. But the laws that just make no distinctions on sex, and just the very idea that women should be free from all harassment and intimidation and should have equal rights to men is a fairly new idea, and it's sweeping the world. There's been some, again, like going back to the retreat of Enlightenment ideals, women's rights has fallen, it's gone up and up, and it's fallen a little bit in the last 10 years, but still higher than it was through most of human history. So that's another revolution. And then just life expectancy. Life expectancy at birth for most of human history averaged around 30 years. Now it's in the 70s globally and close to 80 in the developed world. And I was going to mention, and I briefly alluded to this, but extreme poverty used to apply to 90% of humanity. Now it's less than 9%. So these are, for me, mind-blowing.
Yeah, I agree. And I hear you say follow the trend lines and not only the headlines many times when we're talking about news and how it, like you get a different view of the world if you only.
Yes, another thing that Hans Rosling warned us about.
So, Jose, I'll let you pick what you want to tackle next.
Yeah, so disconnect from every algorithm, every perverse incentive that drags you down. Let's rebel against the replicators, against the dying of the light. Kill the codes that feed the hate. Keep the codes that make you thrive. Celebrate the fucking fact that we're alive. And this is a podcast, celebrate the fucking fact that we're alive.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like to me.
Yeah, I just did that for some sensitive radios. But yeah, so here I'm thinking about Jonathan Haidt and their research on screens and algorithms that are not really like designed to optimize human flourishing, and perverse incentives, like if there are like commercial incentives that push us in directions that if we could choose, we would try to avoid. Yeah, again, like just pushing on the sort of humanist perspective, trying to maximize human flourishing and fight against these things that sometimes are our own constructs. So you have nature on one hand pushing us towards some directions, but then you also have our technologies that many of them are the stuff that led to this progress that you've been mentioning. So being able to have fight diseases and have tap water in different places, but having new technologies that might lead us down a sort of slightly bad path. That's what I'm thinking of.
Well, one thing I appreciate about Jose's music is it's part of a phenomenon where concepts that originated in science, academia, analytic professions, like here we have algorithm, perverse incentive, replicator, code, all of which originated in economics and science, but are put to use here in an entirely natural way. It's not forced. It flows, very, very, very nicely. But it shows ways in which we, at least in some sectors, we're getting smarter. Like our culture is getting smarter, even though there are lots of aspects of our culture that are getting stupider. But the one phenomenon that I write about in Better Angels is the Flynn effect, the fact that IQ scores rose for almost a century. Like a lot of things, they've actually now started to go in the wrong direction the last couple of years. But IQ, people scored better and better on IQ tests. And why did that happen? It wasn't just nutrition and disease. But one hypothesis from James Flynn himself, who discovered the effect, and it was named after him, is that analytic concepts have trickled down from science into everyday conversation, like trade-off, like win-win, like zero-sum game, many of which Jose uses, like correlation and causation. All of these concepts which a number of decades ago would have sounded like, abstruse jargon that only, professors talked about, but they become part of our conversation. I remember when I was a child, statistics was considered a really exotic, difficult concept. But now everyone knows the word statistics, and it may be a way in which our common culture gets inputs from all kinds of sources, from music, from sports, from drug use, from medicine, from horse racing. One of the great things about any language, and particularly the English language, is all the different tributaries. And but science and technical concepts have, I think, increasingly become an input to our conventional wisdom, and I was very pleased to see that in Jose's lyrics.
It's refreshing to not talk about love songs.
When I was a child, I really didn't get this. I didn't know why like 100% of rock songs were about love, or courtship, jealousy, breakups, and so on. Like, isn't there anything else you could write about? Now, of course, Bob Dylan conspicuously broke that mold, although, of course, he did have a lot of love songs, too. But it's just like 100%. The early Beatle albums, 100% until Rubber Soul.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Jose.
a childhood puzzle, still unsolved. I don't know why. It's not 100%, but it's a very large percentage. At least I should say, in Western popular music. I actually was part of a consortium that did a study on a global distribution of music, where including the ethnographic record. The project was called The Natural History of Song, and we wrote our results up in Science magazine. And we found that the dominance of love themes in Western popular music is not universal, that it is a common source of lyrics in songs worldwide. But there's also, there are war songs, that's another big category. There's just dance, even with songs, lullabies and songs to calm down children, and healing songs. That's non-existent in Western culture, but it's a huge source of lyrics for songs worldwide. That is, someone is sick in bed, and the shaman or the witch doctor sings to them.
So, do you think that's an indication of our flourishing in Western cultures? That the only thing that really trouble us are matters of the heart.
It could be, yeah. At least it's not. We don't have love songs, and we've outsourced healing to medicine, which is definitely a source of progress. If my doctor said, "Lie down, I'm going to sing to you," I'd find another doctor.
Jose, can we talk about that lyric about the replicators?
Yeah, I think this could be a interesting one for me, because I'm a fan of Daniel Dennett, and there was Susan Blackmore that wrote about replicators. You have the genes and then the memes, but then Susan Blackmore mentioned a third replicator, basically technology that copies itself. And she was frightened when she gave her TED talk. And I've been thinking about that quite a lot, but I haven't found intellectuals like you that sort of talk about this sort of self-replicating technology, and I think we're on the verge of creating that, if it's not already here. And I know that you're not a fan of fear and panic and running around as headless chickens scaring people, but that's partly what I've done here in this song and another song on the album. So I'm curious on your take about the basically replicators and the fear of them taking resources or whatever.
Yeah, so it's a highly relevant issue, because of course we all have been warned about the possibility that artificial intelligence will try to subjugate us the way we subjugated animals and more powerful cultures subordinated less powerful cultures. I've argued that there's nothing in the concept of intelligence that makes it want to dominate. That's just a goal that is bundled with intelligence in our species, because, to return to the top of the conversation, we're primates. We evolved by natural selection, a competitive process. If something is engineered, there's no reason that it should want to dominate anything. It'll just solve its problems and calculate what it has to calculate, threaten us. Now, if, however, and this is a point that the Belgian writer Martin Boudry has made, I think just today or tomorrow, if we had artificial intelligence that wasn't engineered, but we let loose thousands of copies that then mutated and competed against each other, that would be a bad thing. That kind of replicator would be, in fact, engineer itself to dominate, to crowd out its rivals, to accumulate as much power as possible. So I think that would be a really, really bad way to develop AI. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's my sort of concern, and having studied a little bit of virology, I don't think intelligence is that important. It's more like capability. What are these AIs, are we giving them our credit card numbers? Are we giving them access to call and fool people to do stuff for them, or just ask? That's my concern. So it's not necessarily the intelligence level. It's more are we giving a machine gun to an ape?
So replicators, replicating AI would be a bad idea.
Kill the codes that feed the hate, keep the codes that make you thrive. I'm curious to hear from both of you if you can prescribe any techniques to, because we've all acknowledged that we're all descendants of primates, and we are not immune from unproductive fits of rage. Do you have techniques that you use to help dissipate unproductive states of mind?
You mean in ourselves or
Yes,
in recommendations for society?
you, Stephen, and you, Jose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to have a good night's sleep. That's a good first step, and try not to be hungry all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, just recognize that anger has a function. It's to basically disincentivize people who don't take our interests into account sufficiently. So we try to punish or downgrade or reject people who've harmed us so that in the future, they and others won't try to harm us in turn. That's what it's for. It's recognizing that it helps you say, well, what's the point of getting angry here? It serves no function. So I'll do my best. It's not easy. I'll count to 10. I'll hold my horses. I'll try to let it dissipate.
Okay. Do either of you have any more questions for one another?
I think I have too many, so I look forward to another conversation.
I hope so.
I read The Mattering Instinct by Rebecca, and it was a wonderful book. I loved it.
Rebecca Goldstein, my other half, the philosopher and novelist.
Yeah.
I will mention, I think, my favorite poem.
Yes, thank you.
Occurred to me, because that was, I would say, Hamlet's "What a piece of work is a man." How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god. I read that poem at the end of the first lecture in my course on Introduction to the Human Mind, to try to get students to appreciate what an amazing thing the human mind is.
It's both beautiful poetry and very on brand. Stephen, I have one question for you, because I saw you were doing a keynote at South by a few years ago, and during the audience Q&A, someone came up and just said, what about the aberrations that kind of skew the data in the other way, like in this in the case of in the US, opiate related deaths? And I forget, could you remind me the term you used for things that are actually designed to benefit us actually end up causing us more harm, like painkillers?
Now I don't remember what term I used, but it's an example of how problems are inevitable. New problems are on. This is why I'm skeptical of utopia. We might think we've solved everything, then something comes out of the blue, like SARS-CoV-2 or like fentanyl, a easily synthesized and fatal narcotic. Just when we thought we'd gotten a handle on heroin, fentanyl comes up. Problems are inevitable.
I'm someone who's been in recovery, 12-step recovery, for many decades. And one thing that I really embrace about that program and how ahead of its time it was in the literature is in the AA Big Book. It includes a letter from Carl Jung to Bill Wilson, the movement's founder. Yeah.
Did not know that.
Yeah, and Jung said that in his experience, the only thing that can cure an alcoholic of his disposition or of his malady is a spiritual experience. And I did an episode actually on Jungian analysis. And in preparing for that, I saw another thing he'd said about it being of great benefit to human beings to believe in something that cannot be proven. And I'd be curious to hear from both of you actually on, what your take is on that.
Yeah, that was actually like my preparation question for this interview. Like I use the term religion, and I always think about supernatural religions. But if I understand it right, sociologists use it for any type of ideology that brings people together in one form or another. And I've been a fan of these efforts of secular gatherings, try to find communities that sing together, hang out. And I was always thinking of buildings as something that in Sweden you have all these churches. Not many people believe in a God, but they like to be there and sing, and that's where they have funerals and weddings. So yeah, I'm also curious, like how important is it to have that, like I don't know, collective project as an atheist.
Yeah, there are data that religious communities tend to have some benefits. People are happier. They're more likely to volunteer, to give to charity. It doesn't seem to be the theological beliefs per se, because a spouse of an observant churchgoer or synagogue goer who's kind of schlepped along and is part of the community, even if they don't believe in all the theological stuff, has the same benefits. So it does seem to be community. And Jose mentioned there are humanist and rationalist and effective altruist organizations. There have always been service organizations like Lions Club and Kiwanis Club and other civil society organizations, and 12-step programs, which have a kind of, I think my understanding is that Bill Wilson did specifically come out of a Christian background.
Oh, yeah.
But it's become, I think it's my understanding, it's more ecumenical, that it's
absolutely, and remarkably progressive, because I think included in the steps is choosing a God of your own understanding, and to think that a white stockbroker in the 1930s came up with that idea is pretty expansive.
It is pretty amazing, and the idea of something bigger than yourself, so that you don't surrender to every impulse, but you try to align your behavior with something bigger than yourself, principles that matter to everyone.
Yes.
There is a lot of value in that, and people are theologically kind of squishy. That more and more people now say they're spiritual but not religious. They don't say they're atheists, but they say they have no religion in particular. And people aren't going to be like Thomas Aquinas and have a step-by-step, rationally worked out theory of what something higher is.
Yes.
For a lot of people, that can be vague, and maybe that's all we need.
There's one guy in a meeting who said his higher power was the ghost of Sammy Davis Jr.
Why not?
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. This has been a real joy to chat.
This was fun. Thank you, Jose.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Keep it up. I really enjoy your music.
Thank you so much, and your books.
Please be sure to check out Jose's new album, Against the Dying of the Light, out March 27th, and you can catch him on tour this spring. For more information, please visit jose-gonzalez.com. For the latest from Steven, you can visit his website, stevenpinker.com. There you'll find links to all of his books, including his latest, When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows: Common Knowledge and the Mysteries of Money, Power, and Everyday Life. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Our music is by Panoram. Social media manager is Bailey Constas, and our digital producer is Keenan Cush. If you like Sing for Science, the best way you can support us is to give us a review, tell a friend about the show, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. For more information, please visit singforscience.org and follow us on social media @SingForScience. Thanks for listening.